here today, sadly all virtually, talking to you about digital exclusion, job seeking, and broader issues around social exclusion as well. Just to introduce myself, I lead the digital research at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex, and I'm also a co-lead of Research Track 4 and the Digit Centre. So just to sort of talk about what we're going to be doing today, I'm going to introduce Brian, who works at Digital Brighton and Hove Citizens Online, and he's going to talk briefly about his work. Then I'm going to give a kind of 20-minute presentation about the big picture around digital exclusion in the UK and the research we're doing here in Brighton, and we're doing in London and in New York with my co-investigator Kevin Hernandez. And then I've got we're going to have a kind of in conversation session where I've got three kind of leading questions which I'm going to ask Brian to answer first, and we're also going to share, and that's hopefully we've got people from both from the kind of digital inclusion sector locally and nationally, and people from the kind of academic side of things, and I'm hoping this will be a really good discussion. So just handing over to Brian for a quick intro about yourself and your work.
Morning everyone, Brian with a Y. I give you a mnemonic so you don't get it wrong, because I get emails with Brian with a 9. It's like, hi, why? I'm the Partnership and Projects Manager at Digital Brighton and Hove, and that's a project that's been running since 2015 by Citizens Online. Citizens Online are a fantastic organisation. They work in the digital sphere, which for an organisation, they punch above their weight. They're what's known as a small national. We do projects all over the country. Indeed, our managing director is based in the Shires. The Digital Brighton and Hove project, as I said, has been running for a good 5 years now. And it's a partnership that we've developed with Brighton and Hove City Council. And we're actually partially funded through their library service. So we work with them and do a lot of joint work. We have over 300 organizations now that we interface with, that we network with, that we help support in more than in name only. And we have currently about 400 digital champion volunteers on our book. So these are people who we work with to work with those previous aforementioned 300 organizations in and around Brighton and Hove. We've done some fantastic projects and programs, and I'll tell you a bit more about that as we expand through the morning.
Thanks, Brian. So I'll give you a bit of a talk about the research that we've been doing, and a bit more about the bigger picture about the story of digital exclusion. So yeah, the project I'm going to be talking about today is just one part of a kind of bigger story about my own work on digital exclusion and work, and the bigger story of what the Digit Centre is doing. So, digital futures at work. So what am I going to be talking about today? I'm going to introduce the research that we're doing. Then I'm going to be talking about the persistence of digital exclusion and why I think we should be talking about digital poverty and not digital exclusion. And then I'm going to give some snapshots, really, and some emergent themes from the research we're doing about disconnection, about digital skills, about poverty, and about the importance of human connections, which is where Digital Brighton and Hove really exceed and, as Brian said, punch above their weight. And then I'm going to talk about why this matters and why I think this should be at the top of both policy and research agendas. So first of all, the research that we're doing. So as I mentioned, I'm the co-lead of Research Track 4, the Digital Futures at Work Research Centre, which is reconnecting the disconnected new channels of voice and representation. And the overall research questions that underpin this research tracker: what happens to displaced workers, and how is technology used to help those looking for work, and how are civil society organisations, including trade unions and other NGOs, responding. And it's that both those questions are really key running through the research that we're doing. And in particular, civil society organisations that I think is so important, in particular organisations like Citizens Online, Digital Brighton and Hove, that acting as kind of digital intermediaries for socially excluded people. So I'm carrying out this research with Kevin Hernandez, who I'm hoping is on this call as well, who's my co-investigator from the IDS Digital Cluster. And the kind of big framing of our research was around pre-COVID, was around the fact that job seeking is now carried out online and access to benefits is kind of digital by default, as is the case with a lot of other government services. So having digital skills and access are now really, really important for job seekers and benefit claimants, especially with universal credit. So the research questions that kind of underpin what we're looking at are whether existing inequalities are being amplified, are they being kind of made greater by the digitalisation of job seeking and access to benefits during COVID and the removal of existing offline support mechanisms. So we started doing this research, we'd been planning it for quite a long time, a year or so, and then COVID happened and we realised that with everything moving online and the libraries closing and lots of community centres closing where people would go to get online, it was a really kind of critical time to be looking at this issue. And the kind of broader question is that underlies a lot of what Digit is about, what the research centre about, is like, what does it mean to be a connected worker at the current moment? And there's a lot of stuff. We're all kind of connected workers as we sit here on Zoom dialing into this call. So what does that mean? And what changes are people experienced in their relationship with these tools? Are they making them more empowered, less empowered? Are they making people more excluded? So these are the issues that we're digging into. So where are we doing it? We're doing this study in 3 settings. We're doing the rapid response work, where we're looking at COVID, was carried out by Kevin virtually in his hometown of New York, in various boroughs of New York, in Barking and Dagenham in London, where Citizens Online are also just about to start working. So that's basically the kind of the research that's funded through Digit. So we've been interviewing, because we were not able to do kind of face-to-face interviews with benefit claimants and so on. We've been interviewing people working in civil society organisations, in community groups, and we also interviewed quite a few council staff. Then we got an extra top-up bit of money, thank you very much, to the University of Sussex Higher Education Innovation Fund. And that has meant that we've been able to fund the distribution of 12 tablets through Digital Brighton and Hove, and brilliant the work of the digital champions. So job seekers will be getting tablets with unlimited data, and they'll also get support from the fantastic Anna at Citizens at Digital Brighton and Hove, who's a digital champion par excellence. And then we're going to be carrying on doing this research in those 3 settings. So why do this research? So I wanted to talk a bit about the kind of persistence of digital exclusion and the fact that lots of people are like, oh, well, everyone's got a smartphone now. Why is it important? So this is why I think it's important. In a kind of general sense, I work in the international development sector, and as it's important enough to be one of the sustainable development goals. One of the indicators is the proportion of in the SDGs is the proportion of individuals who've used the internet in the last 3 months. As I've said, the time of COVID means there's a very accelerated moment in digitalisation of employment and access to benefits, as lots more people are trying to claim universal credit. And we think, and we argue, as lots of other people do, that digital exclusion, not having access to and use of skills, leads to not just greater social exclusion. Doesn't mean that you're just excluded from different social institutions, whether it's like anything from political participation to health to education, but it leads to new forms of social exclusion. And this is why I think we need to kind of rethink it as a kind of digital poverty. And I say that because I think it's really interesting that we've started to see that term being used in the press. People have started to talk about digital poverty. And this is a really tragic example from our local paper, the Argus, of a lady who couldn't get a GP's appointment. She didn't have a computer, she didn't have a smartphone, and so she couldn't get a doctor's appointment, and she ended up dying, which is a really tragic story. So this was just in a story from October in the Evening Argus. So you can see the kind of the seriousness of this issue. And similarly with education, we had this great promise of like, oh yeah, all the kids are going to get laptops during the first lockdown. And then this was just announced, I think, also in October, that the allocation of these laptops was slashed by 80%. And we know I'm sure there's research going on in educational spheres, but this means that students who are still sheltering, who are trying to work at home, they were expecting a laptop, they're not going to be able to get one. So yeah, that surely everyone has a computer now. Just some sort of basic data on what that looks like. So we're still at 10% of the adult UK population are what's described as internet non-users. So that means they've either never used the internet or haven't used it in the last 3 months, and that's some ONS statistics. The Lloyd's digital research, which is a really, really useful kind of sort of baseline study on digital skills and access, found that 22% of people in the UK don't have the essential digital skills needed for day-to-day life. 6 million people can't turn on a device, and I'm sure lots of the digital champions that work with citizens online would kind of reiterate that issue. 7 million can't open an app, and so a study published on the Citizens Online website showed that 22% of universal credit claimants need help to complete the online application form. So this is partly why it's such a critical issue to look at during lockdown eras, lockdown times when you can't actually get into a library or a community centre. So here's some data from the Ofcom technology tracker. The purple column is everybody, and then it's different kind of socio-economic classes. So you can see in terms of laptop ownership, it's up kind of like hovering around 70% of AB people in the AB social class have got one, but it comes down to like well below 40% for people in the D and E demographic class. So we can see that it's really strongly sort of access to and ownership of technology is really strongly correlated with your socio-economic status. And this has been the case for years. I'm not saying this isn't a kind of new story, but what I want to emphasise here, that this is continuing. This is a persistent problem. So to show you what this looks like, what does this mean in kind of human terms? What does this mean in terms of people's lives? So I'm just going to share some kind of quotes and snapshots from the research that we've been doing in London, Brighton and New York, because I think this will give you an idea of what this means in people's lives, and some particular themes that myself and Kevin have pulled out from the data. That's Kevin Hernandez, who I'm working with on this. So this is a quote from a lady who works for Barking and Dagenham Council. So she was talking about the fact that they had to keep the council offices open after the first lockdown happened in March, because there were people who just couldn't have any access to council services. And this is talking about the cost of data as a barrier, and we know that's a really, really significant barrier. So she's talking about the fact that people have got no money, no food, no gas, no electric, and they've got no money to put on a mobile phone, and so they're having to come in into the Barking and Dagenham Council office to make phone calls just because they had no credit. So this is a quote from someone who works as an IT trainer for a community employment project in one of the outer boroughs of Brighton. Talking about the fact that for people who are looking for jobs and struggling, talking about the fact that the kind of economic barriers, if you're trying to look for work online, saying I think the people that are looking for jobs and are struggling doing that have those digital barriers in place, because it can be £300 for a computer. Do they have broadband? And that means paying £14 plus a month, depending on the provider. And actually, Ofcom research also shows that the poorer you are, the less likely you are to be able to get online to find the cheap broadband providers. So it's a kind of vicious circle, even just for getting access. So what about the skills that you need? What about digital skills and that as a barrier? So again, this is a quote from one of the council staff in Brighton. So assume that everyone can fill in forms, everyone can always fill in forms online, it's fine. And she's talking here saying there's one lady who was here and actually saw her through the whole afternoon trying to make a universal credit claim. She only got through half of it and it was virtually impossible. And she had no understanding of just clicking or moving the mouse. And that for people who are kind of digital natives, who've been working online for years, you think, well, God, how would you not know to use a mouse? But actually, that's more common than you think. Similarly, and you'd think, oh, maybe it's different in New York, maybe it's different in America. And actually, what's been really interesting about Kevin doing the work in New York is how it's exactly the same issues. The only difference being that in New York, you can get kind of government issued smartphones. So that actually deals with one level of digital inequality. So remembering passwords is a nightmare. It's a nightmare for everybody. But if you think about how important it is for people, especially for people who've got slightly more kind of chaotic lives. So this is from a support worker saying that they didn't remember their password. And so it's all just trying to get into the system to start with. And their experience of what was also interesting was the government kept changing the website. So even through those months when I was helping, I'll be looking at something new too. So the support workers themselves are having to deal with the very kind of changing, in New York at least, having to deal with a kind of very rapidly changing kind of digital interface. So the support worker said, I just knew there was no way in the world they were going to be able to answer this questionnaire or even find the right place to click in the beginning. So a bit more about job seeking and looking for jobs online. And this is another support worker from the States. I think they get overwhelmed with how much information is on the screen and where to focus. So even just typing in what kind of job they want feels overwhelming to some of the clients. And even knowing what the icon with the little person is. So we have all these kind of assumptions of oh yeah, a little envelope means that and a pointy arrow means this, but we're so used to those kind of on-screen metaphors that you can forget what it feels like to just not know that. Uploading stuff is tricky because it requires clicking the upload button and finding the document, and that uploading and passwords and email is some of the themes that keep on coming through in our research. And again, I said, here's another example about email. And I think the second quote, email is a really big one. People forget their passwords. And I think the second part of this quote here is really, really interesting. It says, I think setting up email is perhaps one of the bigger hurdles, because if you haven't got that, it's like that umbrella thing. Whether it's online shopping, banking, registering with a site, pretty much every job site you have to register with if you have to use it reasonably efficiently so you can put your CV there. So I think it's that interesting, that thing of not being able to kind of manage email accounts kind of shuts a lot of doors to a lots of other things in life, like online banking, like buying stuff online, finding out the cheapest package for things. And if you can't get the email thing, if you're not on top of the email thing, which a lot of people aren't, then it kind of closes off a whole realm. You're excluded. You're socially excluded. So that's what I was talking about with these new forms of social exclusion. And I think this is a really heartbreaking quote, actually. I think the bureaucracy isn't getting simpler. So the underlying bureaucracies of universal credit and all the other benefits people are entitled to, just forget about the digital. Them in themselves are really, really complex, and they have been for years. And so really what you need to do is sit down next to somebody. And we can't do that at the moment. We can't sit down next to people at the moment, which is why I think the work of the kind of remote digital champions like Anna and the other digital champions that Citizen Online work with is so incredible. They're so patient and they do such brilliant work. I think people can be very easily made to feel stupid, and they're already vulnerable. And I think that's the tragedy of this. This is what makes me feel really passionate about this work, is that why are these digital systems making people feel stupid? Why are they making vulnerable people feel more vulnerable? So this, and it's interesting here for the kind of software engineers, if they're here. So the software may be designed so it only recognises one kind of response and you can't talk your way out of it. So with online forms, they're expecting a certain response, and then you get the kind of computer says no thing, and it makes you feel it can make you feel much more vulnerable, much more, it can make you feel really frustrated. This last quote sort of sums up why the work of intermediaries like Citizens Online and all the other groups, often there'll be church groups, or there'll be people like the YMCA in Brighton, all kinds of groups who are providing kind of informal technical support. So this is a sort of employment support worker in the US. talking about who is benefiting, who is able to kind of benefit from a Zoom training. And they were saying that basically this guy here is saying that people haven't got many people to support them really struggle, but the people who can sign up to Zoom, they're people who've got a lot of people around them. They might be their kids, they might be relatives, they might be just people they know who can provide that digital support. So it just shows that I don't think we can think about digital exclusion without thinking about this social exclusion. So this support worker is saying here that the people who can access this employment support, the people who've got someone to give them sort of informal tech support. So why does this matter? Why does this matter for policy? I mean, I'm hoping you're reaching your own conclusions, or you're people who work in these spaces anyway. So I'm just going to talk a bit in these last set of slides about why I think this is important for policy and what research agendas we should be pursuing. So Brian worked on the One Digital programme, and there was a really interesting evaluation of it, and I thought this was absolutely sort of a killer quote actually. In a fragmented world, digital inclusion, the topic's not a political priority. It's been around for years. During the time of the Blair era, for those of us old enough to remember that, there was a lot of money that went into digital exclusion. There was through the Cabinet Office and so on. There was money for it. I was on the board of the Sussex Community Internet Project, and we had money to spend to get people online. But now it's seen as politically unattractive, partly because it's intractable. So it's like the numbers aren't coming down. So it's not a big spending priority. The focus is on digital skills and how they can boost productivity. And yet we've seen, just even from those snapshots, this isn't about just about digital skills and productivity. This is about feeling included in society and accessing your fundamental entitlements, accessing universal credit that you're entitled to. And then this is another quote from that same evaluation. It's those essential digital skills which we can see from the Lloyd's report. They're not high on the agenda, even though they're really lacking. And again, it's all through this kind of prism of workplace productivity. And don't get me wrong, I think digital workplace skills are really, really important. But I think I really like this quote here. It's not easy to align with a kind of social justice and inclusion agenda. And I think my take is that we need to be seeing this through a social justice and inclusion agenda. And just an additional note, the charities and the NGOs and the organisations that are providing this kind of interim digital support, they're getting totally whacked at the moment. They're facing the latest statistic I got was a 48% decline in funding this year, and this is on the back of years and years of austerity, where we've seen cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts, where we thought it couldn't get any worse at local level. So just in the final 3 slides, I'm going to look at some research directions, this is a kind of call to arms for researchers. So the first is that we should be seeing this kind of digital poverty. This term, digital poverty, is an axis of inequality alongside health inequalities and so on, and other kinds of inequality. And there's a quote from the very big and very good ESRC scoping review on ways of being in a digital age that Simeon Yates et al. Did. So they recommend that the ESRC, that future research looks at this interaction between digital inequities and other areas of social inequity. So it's sort of saying that while this is an area of concern, maybe there hasn't been enough research on it. And we know that the existing research does show how these inequalities intersect with race, gender and class. So they need to be seen in an intersectional way. And I think at this kind of current political moment, unemployment's going up, poverty's going up. So we need to ensure that this digital poverty is looked at alongside these other axes of deprivation. The second area research that I think we need to probing is like how that really came through in this research is looking at how other forms of connectivity intersect with the digital inequality. So that came through in that last quote where the guy was saying, well, the people who managed to make it onto Zoom were the ones who had a lot of buddies to help them get online. And we need to understand these different aspects of disconnection in relation to job seeking and access to social protection. And that disconnection can be disconnection from communities, from like a social circle, loneliness and social exclusion. It can be kind of geographical disconnection. It could be that there aren't jobs in your like geographical area, and then the costs of transport are too great. There can be lots of different aspects of disconnection as well. So looking at that in a kind of looking at social and digital disconnection in a more kind of holistic way, we think is really important. And the third is strikes right at the heart of the work that the Digit Centre is about. It's about being a connected worker. So we've seen as work moves online, and we've seen an increased in the amount of systems used for kind of monitoring workers' activity, whether that's workers in the gig economy who are constantly tracked, or workers in the kind of more formal economy, getting the kind of quantified worker and getting more and more surveillance. And that is now extending to job seekers, the fact that you have to kind of submit evidence of your job seeking activity. So we've got this technological apparatus, like arguably lessening our kind of individual agency and our rights and invading our privacy. But so how do we reconcile that? This is one of the things that we're really sort of, myself and Kevin are really trying to chew over and think about. How do we reconcile everybody's right to disconnect, your right to privacy, your kind of your fundamental right to privacy within your need and your right to be connected. And I think this is a really really important issue. And I think this is one of the pieces that kind of, if you think about the kind of conceptual work that we're trying to do in the Digit Centre, I think this is one of the things that I'd really like us to get our teeth into. So finally, just some references for the reference nerds among you. Lloyds Bank Consumer Digital Index has got some really, really great data. Well, great, I think quite depressing data on those fundamental digital skills, who's got them, who hasn't got them. So now there's going to be three talking points, which I'm going to kind of introduce a bit and then ask Brian to respond to, and then we can broaden them out and we'll go through them 1, 2, 3. So the first one is about like the digital skills for life and who's got them and who hasn't got them. And I think one of the things that was really struck me, both from the kind of the statistical data from that Lloyds Bank research and from the qualitative data that we've got from own research, is the fact that we have this assumption that everyone's got computers, so everyone can use them really well. And I know from my own PhD research, which I did with socially excluded young homeless women in Brighton, that just because you have a smartphone doesn't mean you've got really good digital skills. So just a quick comment from Brian, and then maybe we can open it up just on this issue of digital skills for life and employment, and just some of your reflections on that, and then we can move on to the next two questions.
Thanks for that, Becky. That was really insightful. And if I may, before I launch into it, I just want to step back and give a bit of context around One Digital. It's funny because in 2017, when I joined Clarion Housing Group and with their charity, Clarion Futures, I didn't know anything about digital championing, but yet 3-4 years later, I'm at the forefront of that with that One Digital consortium. And that was a lottery funded program. It had a number of partners in it, and of which Citizens Online was one of them. So we already worked together, so we had history, or now we have history, I should say. And the key thing about each one of the partners, they were looking at specific aspects of digital inclusion. And for Clarion Futures, we were looking at employment and how digital champions can factor into that. Now, the key things that we found was around how do you identify or acknowledge what digital exclusion is, because there's no line that you cross and go, oh, I'm digitally included now. Because if you're talking about connectivity, that's one thing. You're talking about technology, that's another thing. And then you're talking about utility. So, okay, so you can be, yes, I can afford to get online, rare. Yes, I have the tools and I know what I'm doing, again, rare. And then, okay, I have both and I know what I'm doing, uber rare. We take for granted that people have smartphones or they have something that connects them to the internet, and that gives them some sort of utility, as I say. Once you're included, then you have to look at what levels of digital literacy there is. Do people understand what they're doing and how to do it online? And can they do that confidently? And it's interesting, that whole journey, as well as traveling the road of digital championing, we were at the forefront of the discussion about foundation skills to essential digital skills, which we factored all of those things into how we shape our work. So as I said, we were working with employability. And so what we had to do was to support our digital champions, who were in the main volunteers, and we supported them to understand, how do you begin that conversation with someone who they're not sure what their problem is. They just know that they're required to get a job, to do their universal credit. They're being sanctioned because they haven't made an appointment, or they're not getting the email, and all these kind of in-between bits. How do they even know? So we have to, instead of making that assumption ourselves, and this took many iterations of making these questionnaires and running them out and trialing them, do they know what this is? Can they identify what this is? Do they know how to turn a computer on? Do they know what a keyboard is? Are they familiar with a keyboard? If any of those questions, the response was no, we just have to take them to another move to learn my way, or to get them some basic, really basic hands-on training so they understand what they're doing. And then we, in some cases, progress to using their phones and how they can do that and check their emails and so on and so forth. But I think you have to start from the state of not being presumptuous about where people are, because it's funny that it only took last year where they signed into Human Rights Convention that access to the internet is a human right, but it's a guideline, not an enshrined one. I think it's Article 19 and it's a subset. But places like Finland are ensuring that everyone has access to at least 1 megabit download speed. Yeah, and they're saying that's a human right. Now, we're a G7 country. Why are we not leading the way in doing that? Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's hard, but at least we could make some forays into doing that. So I think, the key thing around looking at digital skills is understanding that even within the employed sector, I think it's 53%, if you go by the Lloyd's Consumer Index, 53% of employed people are not confidently online. So they might know the tools, they might understand to use their email. But you go to someone in the street, yes, they've got the Facebook app on their phone and they've got an email. That's the only way you get onto Facebook. They don't recognize that their email is their digital passport, if you will, that they need that email, access this, to check on that, and to do whatever else they need to do online. And therefore, our questionnaires would further delve into that level of understanding, like, can they do an attachment? Can they reply to an email? And then further, do they know how to search for information online? And interestingly, about searching online, there's research that says even those with degrees are only a fractionally better, like about, I think, 30% better at understanding what's a paid advertisement and what's their actual search for. Do people, and then their levels of digital inclusion, as I said, do people understand that that Google is only going to give you the type of results that you want, that's factored to you, not the most relevant. It's going to be the most relevant to you. So if you are someone that's interested in digital, and your searches around digital and your emails around digital, of course Google aggregates that information. So when you do a search, your top search is going to be different from my top search, perhaps. So that's the kind of thing that people don't recognize, and we get caught in an echo chamber and so on and so forth. So there's so many different levels of trying to ascertain where people's understanding of their own digital inclusion is. And I'm so looking forward to this project with Becky, because I don't want her to start where we were 3 years ago, doing all of those bits and saying, okay, where should we ask those questions? In fact, what we want to do now is build on that stuff, because there's not only us, Age UK, Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations, Citizens Online, Digital Unite, and Carrying Futures have done this fantastic work. And they've got, and the data's online actually, that anyone can have a look at if you're interested. If you search One Digital Programme UK, you'll find that. But yeah, I think that's the cool thing around digital skills is, I think that the government has come a long way from, I think it was just foundation skills to essential digital skills, and then it progresses along. And then you have, skills within the workplace and skills for personal life. And I think what they've done there is really good. And that's because I remember we all worked with the DCMS on that. They took a lot of input from the Lloyd's Consumer Index. And that's a really good baseline to start with. But particularly when you're looking at now employability, you have to look at people's Maslow, and I keep saying that, their hierarchy of basic needs. It's difficult to get someone interested in this digital tech space when they're concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to pay their rent, put food on their table, and to feed their kids if they have any. The other part of that is you start looking at the demographics, and you start to see that young people, they are early adopters, but they're highly digital illiterate. People within the age group, I think, was it 40 to 50 are the hardest to convert, because they're going to be trade people, and their view is, well, I've done my whole life without it. My grandkids do it, or my daughter does that if I need to do it. And then counterintuitively, it's the silver surfers, so people that are retired or about to retire, who are the easiest to make that shift, because they have, you can easily sell them the need. You get them online to show, hey, you can speak to your son in Australia, just like that, okay, and you get them to convert. So I think it's a multi-layer cake that you have to look at when you begin to tackle digital exclusion. And there's a lot of tacit information out there now, which is proven quantitatively and qualitatively in the numbers speak for themselves. So I really want to have this at the forefront of government conversation, because people who were at the outskirts of society have now fallen through the cracks, because COVID has just pushed everyone away. You can't see people, unless there's a befriending network in your facility. There's nothing that you can do. I mean, I signed up at the beginning of COVID, at the first lockdown, to my Facebook local befriending group, whereby someone would say, look, there's Beatrice at number 67 blah 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 road, can someone check in on her, or she needs shopping, she's told me, can someone go and buy it? That's fantastic. But what would be better is that Beatrice can get on Facebook or get onto Morrison's and order it herself, right? There's another element to say, that's another aspect of what you can do. I'll close my sermon by saying what I think one of the difficulties that we have. So apart from our own perceptions or the wider perceptions, is the word digital. And I think it's cliquey, and I think it's exclusive, and I think it well, with everything, it either turns you on or it turns you off. If you're outside, you're like, oh no, cyberspace, internet, hacking, all of that, I don't want to hear. But when you're in, you think, okay, you know what you're on about, but do you? To me, the word digital simply means connections. It's what we're doing now. Yeah, we're in the digital space and we're connecting. With that connection, it's between another human and another human. And that's the bit that we need to kind of push forward to the forefront. So whether you're doing it through Zoom, through WhatsApp, on Facebook, You know, that word digital, it just throws people, but essentially you are just interfacing. And that's all that we need to do. So we're in a world where people think that AI is going to take over, or, you know, the technological revolution is going to push people. And it's actually no. In fact, you'll find that the more technically advanced we get, is the more human involvement you're going to need, because someone has to show you how to do it. And that can only be done by interface. And yes, you can do a course online and click and redo, but at one point you're going to need to speak to someone. So yeah, let's continue to be human about this work.
Thanks, Brian. I think there's let's continue to be human about it. And I think there's been so much, when you say this, really, we can get very cliquey about that word digital. As someone who kind of runs a digital research group, often I find the problem is that people don't see digital where they need to see it, and actually they don't see how so many of their everyday activities are actually mediated by digital technology. So I wondered if any of the people we've got in this virtual space have got any contributions on this idea about digital skills for life. Kevin, I don't know if you want to contribute any more, anything from your findings from the research in New York, and you just feel free to jump in.
Everything that Becky said, yeah, it's true. There is a lot of overlap between the stuff that we see in New York and the stuff that we found in the UK. I would say that one of the values of having done the case study in the US as well is that I've been working with mainly a different demographic in New York City. I've been working mainly with NGOs that don't really have a digital focus, but that find themselves having to do more digital stuff. They might have been doing some digital stuff in the past related to work, helping people find work online, and also doing like digital training courses. But now they're also having to help people apply for unemployment and also apply for other government benefits. But then a majority of the people who they work with, or not a majority, but many of the people who they work with aren't even able to apply for government benefits, which brings in another question of exclusion, because a lot of them are migrants and undocumented migrants. So that the work in NYC really highlights their struggle and how being connected goes beyond digital. It's kind of like being connected to a social safety net. And I think that that's something that has been coming out really strong in our research. So I think, yeah, just making the word, like the idea of a connected worker, something that goes beyond technology, is something that's important.
I think that is absolutely what this work is about, because it's social inclusion through digital inclusion, essentially. And you know, it's a Venn diagram, and there's huge overlap, and that's the core aspect, is that it has to be human based and human focused work.
Exactly. So I think you said something about the hierarchy of needs, right? And I think it's the thing about looking at digital inclusion as a means to an end rather than an end in itself, right? It's digital inclusion as a means to being socially included rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. So we've kind of segued into my next question, which was, is digital inclusion really all about social inclusion? And I think Kevin and Brian just answered that one firmly yes, really. And I think this kind of drawing attention again to the fact that a lot of the organisations, I don't know what the situation is in the States, but in the UK, charities, as I said, really struggling for funding, and we're lucky in Brighton that Digital Brighton and Hove has received some money from the council to work on this, and I think from the lottery as well, and we were able to contribute something from the University of Sussex Higher Education Innovation Fund. So yeah, any other comments from people? So Alice just put something in the chat about wondering if any of the discussion partners work with public libraries on this issue. Yeah, so the library in Brighton is one of the key partners and funders of this work in Brighton. So yeah, and I think they're really, really important. I think, yeah, they're absolutely vital. So I think that was one of the things that kind of really triggered us to start doing the research in the summer, slightly ahead of schedule, was about seeing all these places where people need to go went to get online, seeing those kind of closed down, and obviously the library is a really important one. And also knowing that the library is a space where people can kind of get informal digital support as well, and it's that kind of, having that kind of person sitting next to people.
And I think, I think the core bit around social inclusion is that there's always this perception, if I take the worst example out there, which is Make America Great Again, there's this thing that we seem to look back in the past with rose-tinted lenses, and there's this thing that we had community and that people would help out. And I'm sure there's no statistics to back that up. It's just something that happens with age. That there's a sense that things were better when I was a lad, or oh, you didn't have this and you didn't have that. And I'm at that age now where I'm starting to see myself become my mum and my dad, and I hate it. But the point I'm making is that people, there's a disconnect, and what it is that people are kind of fearful. They think, oh well, this has happened and I don't want to get online, or we hear about people phishing, and you get those emails from X bank saying, hey, you need to log in and change your password, and you're like, no, I don't. Or some people unfortunately have, and they've gone, I got this email, or I got this, whatever it is, and I've been around online since, was it the 411 emails from a Nigerian prince, or if you forward this to 10 people, that chain mail, and you think, oh, you'll be blessed with whatever, and you think, oh wow, this is fantastic. Or Microsoft will give you a share of their, and it's just like, oh my gosh. So maybe it's because I've been birthed in the fire through all of that, and knowing how to spot a good one and how to spot a bad one. But I think people need to recognize that wherever people get on board, there's more of that now. But it's just the same way when you teach someone to go out on the street. Like, so for my daughter, for example, when we're walking on the street, she knows she needs to be on this side of the road, or she needs to hold my hand when we're crossing the road. And then I'm sure when she gets older, I'm going to have to tell her about how to use self-defense, how to be aware of people who's walking behind you, what you're doing late at night. And those are things that we do socially. Now, if you translate that into a digital highway, and I use the word highway because that gives you the concept of busy traffic, right? And that's what it is. And I think we need to conceptualize what happens IRL, in real life, to the cyberspace. And I think it's just the same way. It's being able to get people to conceptualize what they will be doing online. So about looking for the lock, about being clever with your passwords and not sharing passwords, and case sensitive and symbols, and doing things like that. Because if you tell someone, if you go to the cash point and you take money out, you don't want to be going, this is my number, and the £50 hanging out of your back pocket as you've just taken it out, because that would be taken like that. It's the same thing when you begin to conceptualize telling people to be safe online. And I think that the difficulty, so let's put COVID into our work now, where we're going into with helping people through employment, is that not only do you have to, so digital in itself is conceptual, it's not tangible. But now you're working in a space where you can't get to speak to someone face to face. And let's remember the amount of communication that is translated through face to face. So I'm moving my hands around, I'm modulating my pitch so that you can understand my levels of excitement or whatever it is that I'm trying to convey. But when you have someone who now you have to try and do that interface through word, through text only, through imagery, or you send a flow chart that says, okay, what you want to do is open this, do this, and then get them online. How do you begin to do that, and how do you begin to support them? Because the core thing around making that transition in people is giving them the confidence, so that they can feel, oh yes, I can. And they don't feel that, oh my gosh, that's just my daughter does it. Oh, come and help me with this. You know, oh, I can't, all these keys. But actually, step by step by step. I want to learn my way. You want to this, and then you understand how to use the keyboard, and you know the shift key, and how to get without using in all caps, and learn about netiquette and all these things. They begin to come in like that. I've worked with people who are partially sighted, which they essentially they're blind, and configuring them to utilize their tablet. I know nothing about iOS. So the great thing about doing that kind of work is, okay, I don't know what to do. Let's find together. So we do a voice command and search Google and get the answer, and then it tells us to do this. And not only am I learning, the person I'm working with is learning too. So then they see, oh, well, I'm getting help from someone who doesn't know, but he's essentially showing me how I can find out myself. So what's that? Action-centered learning, learning by doing. I worked with someone in Bromley who was heavily dyslexic. And this is the key thing about this thing about employability and assumptions. The people who are employed to get people into work may not recognize, or actually, the individual might recognize, but they're working in a structure that doesn't allow them to make concession for someone who has a disability that may impair them. So physically, they look fine, they talk well, but you don't know what can't be shown is the pressure that this person goes through in their whole life trying to understand the symbols and what words mean, and they literally fall apart. So you think, yeah, but they've read the letter I sent. It's not through reading, it's through recognizing the symbols of what the shape of this word means, so they understand it. That's how critically dyslexic this gentleman was. So I worked with him and we showed him how to use the microphone, how to find it on Google Chrome, how to use it, voice commands on his phone, set it up so he can do it. So interestingly, so you had a blind person who couldn't really see what they were doing, but had haptic feedback and understood how to find things. And it would say down to the left, further left, press there, and then they know what they're doing. And then you have a dyslexic person who can see and is physically able, but he can't read what he's seeing. So essentially, they're the same people, but they're not seen the same. And this is why I work with another fantastic charity called Diversity and Ability is core, because not only is it about language, it's about our perceptions of people who have hidden neurodiverse issues and things like that. And now let's look at another one to all our Brexit compatriots online, and that's English as a second language, ESOL. We don't appreciate, or we don't recognize, I should say, how much people from overseas contribute to the UK economy. So it's and there's more of them, particularly on the coast and in London, and so they need to tap into the services in order to contribute and benefit their own lives. So it's interesting that to teach them how actually you can get this in a language you understand. You can get Google to do a translate on the web page, and it will show it in a language that you understand. Whilst they're doing their English as a second language course, why should they be prevented from keeping a roof over their head? And remember the whole thing about them being here so that they can contribute as a UK taxpayer. So there are so many different levels of digital literacy that work in and about social inclusion, not at the service, immediately perceived.
So special thanks to Brian for bringing up this kind of neurodiversity issue that actually we've really struggled with as we move our teaching online. That I don't know how brilliant universities have been about as they move their kind of teaching and learning online, about making sure that the way that we present our materials is good for people with different kinds of different neurodiverse individuals. So I think that's just something we're struggling with across the board.
Yeah, it's brought it right down to the core nub, and the essence of what I'm saying is that it is a human-centered approach. So before I explain, I'll give you an example. I work with a housing association who kind of got ahead of the this kind of AI perception and what it means about utilizing technology. So what they did was they created an app that made people be able to go online and say, I've got a problem, my window's broken, can I report it? Oh, I want to pay my rent, I can do it on the phone. And what the staff were fearful, they were like, oh my gosh, if they move these services to the app, that means I no longer have got a job to call everyone and say how you doing, and you're late with your rent, or it was. So there was that whole scenario that people thought they were going to lose their jobs. And what the housing association did, they assured people that this isn't about you using your jobs. This is about utilizing the technology more effectively. So how did they do that? Well, what they did was they made sure that the people who used the app were able to use the app and were able to utilize it to report, to get in touch with, and to use it as it's meant to do, which meant that the people who they had a risk register of the people who had conditions, who were elderly, who were vulnerable. And that meant that when they called through to the hotline, that meant that the people that were in situ as frontline telephone support, they weren't doing less. What it meant was they could spend more time with those people who needed it. Whereas the people who were just like, oh, look, mate, can you come around and sort it out? No, go on the app, you could, or send an email, you don't have an issue, use the technology as it's supposed to be used. So the core thing about that is that you cannot take humans out of the picture. So in essence, what I said about, and maybe it's being able to do that online, is that she has the ability, but that doesn't mean, what's the core payoff about that delivery is when John comes around again and he knows who Mavis is, and he's like, hey, how are you? We've got this. Oh, unfortunately, we didn't have your milk, so we've replaced it with long life milk. And here's that connection. But the whole thing about everything that you said ties into the human approach. So essentially, I mean, again, I'm going off the top of the head now. For all the things that you've just listed, is that what the government needs to really recognize is that instead of trying to make things more efficient and point people over there and get someone on the phone line that you just have to press this and wait, and you spend 25 minutes, half an hour plus waiting for someone to speak to tell you that you have to go to an A&E. It's actually, let's get more humans in where they're needed. And that's the core thing. When you're speaking to a human who empathizes and understands what you may be going through, then that puts you at ease and go, look, I'm having a problem, and they're like, fine. They're specialists, they understand that, and therefore people are not left to fend for themselves and to find through the forms. And as you say, that we have to come up with groups and organizations and little and set up our own cliques in order to support people who don't understand what the wider cliques are about. So I totally take your point, Ruth, and that is essentially what all of this is about. So it's about social inclusion, with the advent of, hey, we can use this technology should we need it. I don't think it's about excluding or an either or approach. It's yes and, not yes but.
Thanks, Brian. I just wanted to say thanks to Ruth for that. Was really, really powerful. That was really incredible, and thanks for your contribution. And shout out to another Open University student, someone who did her master's and her PhD at a very advanced age through the OU. I think it's an absolutely incredible institution. And I just wanted to come back to that issue you talked about, design justice, and it just making this is that people. One of the issues that we talk about a lot in our work at IDS is about this idea that you kind of have this technological determinism. Oh, the technology does this, and this is what the technology is making these decisions. These are systems that are designed by people, and you could argue that and this is why I think this whole thing about kind of really tussling this idea of the connected worker, and this kind of managing to do that in a way which is actually respects people's autonomy and agency and gives people the power. And at the moment, I think these systems, whether you're a benefit claimant or whether you're an Uber driver or someone whose work is being constantly monitored by someone who's just checking in on what you're doing online, that isn't encouraging people's sense of agency and self-determination. I think it's actually threatening to that, and I think that's why we really need to be kind of like really working through how to reconcile the good of digital inclusion and getting people online and getting people connected with the kind of technological bads. So we had a question from Dave Barker. This is one for you, Brian. How are Brighton, Barking and Dagenham, and how are all the digital inclusion players working with other people to join up in this space? And that's probably a question for citizens online more generally.
Well, the cool thing is that we're a flagship program at Digital Brighton and Hove. And obviously we're able to be in that position because we have had been a good bit of funding. We had Digital Gwynedd in Wales, and we also had Digital, I forget, somewhere far north of London, where I'm originally from. So somewhere up north. And these are the templates by which we can replicate and use for other projects. So if you happen to look at Citizens Online's website, there's a lot of services they offer, from digital consultancy to everything else going down. So it's essentially, however, the work is around digital championing. And that what digital champions are, they're a means of extending our reach into the community and a lot further than we are, because we're not frontline. We're not on the front lines. We're supporting people who are on the front lines. So essentially, our work that's going to take place in Barking and Dagenham and across East London is around seeing what we can do to help the council to engage with the digital champions. Now, there's kind of 3 ways of doing that. So I've mentioned volunteer digital champions, and that generally doesn't work unless you have some kind of a volunteer coordinator or digital champion coordinator at ETC. So that's imperative. And another way is that you have an embedded champion. So that's someone who works for the council or works for the organization and also is equipped and skilled to put that training across. And then the ultimate way, top tier, is to employ someone as a digital champion, as we have done with Anna. And if you see check the link that Becky's just passed through, if you check on all the blogs about Anna's work on the Citizens Online website, you can see how rewarding it is for her. So I think that's the core thing. It's about recognizing that you need a means to reach the people, and as close as you can to face in an international pandemic as you can get. And that may be a socially distanced space, let's say post-lockdown rather than post-COVID, whenever that is. So post-lockdown, if you can get people together in a socially distant space, you can generally support someone. They've got a tablet and you can say, okay, right, this is what you want to do, and you can mirror it and support them. I think that's a key element of this work. However, we also need to look at more innovative ways, or additional innovative ways of supporting people online and getting them to utilize the internet. And I think a key part of the program that we're about to do with Dr. Becky is that we're providing not just the tablet, so we're providing connectivity too. So, the last thing you want to do is provide this lovely tablet and then you go, okay, you need to go to a Costa, or you need to have broadband at home and there's none, or you can't access the Costa. So it's like, okay, here's a SIM that has X amount of data on it, and it's a rolling contract, and we can support you throughout the length of this project. So yeah, I hope that's helped. But if you want to add any more specificity to your question, Michelle.
Yeah, I put another link into CAST, which is the organisation that Brian's predecessor has now gone to work for. They're a kind of nationwide organisation working with not-for-profits using technology for good. Any other sort of questions or comments from anybody, any other commentators? I just wanted to kind of hammer home the fact that I think everything that we've heard about today, from Brian's reflections, from Ruth's reflections, has really reinforced for me that this is a really critical. This is actually quite a good sort of policy moment and a time for us all to be putting digital poverty and putting digital exclusion and its impacts onto the research and policy agenda, and sort of also looking beyond that to say, well, we want technological systems which work for people, which don't leave people, which are designed in such a way that don't leave people feeling anxious, feeling guilty before they've even done anything, feeling kind of punished, feel included in a positive way. There's a term that we use in social inclusion called adverse incorporation, which means that you're incorporated into kind of technological sort of digital society, but it's actually having a negative impact. And I think so much of what we're seeing at the moment is adverse incorporation, that people are included into digital society, whether you're an Uber driver who's not able to get an insight into the algorithms that are determining how much you're earning, or someone who's not able to get the benefits you're entitled to, that you're included in a negative way, and that we all need to take responsibility for, and policymakers need to take responsibility to figuring out how we can make these systems more equitable.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on, before we wrap, is I don't think we delved into the specificity of the third question. So for the audience that's still with us, that question came about as when I was talking with Becky last week, and there was a meme going around saying, describe your job badly. And describing my job badly is trying to incorporate people into the matrix. And I think whilst we're talking about giving people the ability to get online, so that's either through tech or through connectivity, the next thing, as I said, is around making sure you incorporate digital literacy around that. So giving people the wherewithal to understand that if they're on an Android phone, which is essentially Google, which is a data hoover, you're tied into Google Maps, and then you're tied into anything else Google, which means you're essentially sharing everything and anything about your use of that phone with them. There's ways around that. But I think when I think the first thing is it's a poison chalice, if you will. It is getting people to understand how they can utilize it, and then getting them to understand the choices they can make around using it. And again, that's a winding road, and you start to talk about all different aspects of things that you can use and things that you can, apps and technologies and different bits about how you get people to secure their privacy or make choices about how best they can share that information. And I think the other meme, which I think we are all familiar with, is what's the greatest lie that we all tell, and we probably do it on the regular, and that is, I have clicked here because I have read and understood all the terms and conditions of this free application that I'm signing up for to utilize. So I think that's something that we all, but there's, I forget the name of the body, but just in the same way that Ruth mentioned, there's a group of people who have come together to make things in plain English. And it's deliberately not written in plain English, so that you can sign your soul away whenever you want to use something. But people are campaigning actively to make sure that there are others who can, when you do sign up for something, in plain English, it says, this is what you're giving away to utilize this thing for free. And essentially, that's all it comes down to, despite the fact of whether or not you're breaking the law and trying to reverse engineer the app. None of us are trying to do that. But what we really want to know is, what are we sacrificing to utilize your application? And I think I think that bit of knowledge and understanding comes from at least getting people to understand what they can use first. Because if you start that conversation first, then you're undoing the work of the utility that people can access. And then what do? Because the world is not gonna, well, it's been forced to do a handbrake now. That handbrake and pause has made us realize just how much people need to utilize this tool. And then they can make a choice and say, well, I don't care, you know, or they can make a choice and go, actually, I'm concerned about how much information you want from me just for me to know where I'm going in my car.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Often that piece around people's kind of individual agency and digital privacy is treated as a kind of functional thing when we're talking about digital skills. Like, it's really important to keep your credit card details safe, but actually making that a broader issue about what's your right to privacy and your right not to share data, I think is a really fundamental part of digital inclusion. So any kind of final comments on like how we can get this on the policy agenda, how we can kind of research issues that people feel that are worth pursuing?
Thank you for all the information you provided. I was curious to know how you're developing this. What are the next steps for you?
The tablets are being distributed now through Anna and Katie at Digital Brighton and Hove, and I think there's a few left. Actually, I think we've got a few places left. So if there's people who still need, got any job seekers who want to do references, and then we're going to carry on doing interviews in Brighton and in Barking and Dagenham. And what I personally, and I think with Kevin, we'd really like to dig in more to this, to carry on doing research, to sort of digging in more into these different aspects of digital exclusion and just getting beyond those kind of that quantitative data, and also exploring that tension that between the kind of over-connected worker and how people feel about their kind of their need to be kind of continuously kind of connected and reporting into all these sort of technological systems, and their kind of right to privacy and their right to their own agency, because I think there's a lot of kind of genuine concerns, not just in the kind of space to do with employability and benefits, but more broadly. They're digging further and into more depth into these issues. And with the tablet scheme, we're looking at people's progression to see whether people kind of want to carry on being connected after that, whether what their learning journeys are like, what difference it really makes to their lives in a kind of qualitative way. But any suggestions welcome. The Digit Centre is a multi-year research project, and we'll be looking for more funding to complement the funding we've got from the Digit as well. But any suggestions?
Well, I'm also looking for suggestions, ideas, because we were faced with similar issues, especially with COVID. And it just enhanced that. Sorry, I'm a careers coordinator for Roots Project. I see some of my colleagues are also here. And David is one of the trainers that comes to White Hawk Inn, where I'm based. The people that we normally support already have those issues, but then with COVID, because they were not able to access the center, quite a few of my participants didn't even have a laptop. So fortunately, we were able to use a Roots budget to buy laptops for some of our participants, and also SIM cards so they could have access to data. I agree with a lot of things that was said here, and a lot of issues are very, very similar. And I think from what I've experienced, some of my participants, they feel then very overwhelmed. So we have kind of handheld support, but then at each stage they need more and more, and they can become very very overwhelmed. I can't remember who mentioned emails, and for job seekers, it seems very easy to just sign up to a few platforms, but then they get bombarded by emails if they don't manage their preferences. So they just then completely disconnect from that, and they may lose very good opportunities, including job interviews, because then they're just buried under all of those emails, and they just feel overwhelmed with the being flooded with emails, and then they can't also differentiate between spam and genuinely genuine emails. It is something that we're trying also to look for answers and see how we can empower our participants.
Thanks for that, Mirko. That's awesome, and that's in line with my direct experience. I think the first thing is to deal with capacity, because and that's, you know, whether or not your staff or your team have the ability to support people on a one-to-one basis, because that's the only way you kind of generally do this. And I say only loosely because now we have to think about other ways of doing it. And the way we did it before is, you know, in a pre-COVID world, there'd be a job club, and we'll have the, you know, the work coach there, and we'd have a team of digital champions supporting at each job club whenever it is run, once a week or bi-weekly, whenever, and supporting people directly with what they need to do. So there's ad hoc support, and then there's direct support where, you know, Jane's coming in at 11 o'clock next week, Monday, and we're going to work with her to do the X, Y, and Z. And then within that, the great thing about that kind of forum is that you get to, not only, it's not as if you have a preset menu of things that you're going to do, but the core element is to get them employed. And then you meet them at the point of their digital literacy, if you will. So you can't say, okay, do this, do this, do this. It's like some people may already do that. They may have a CV, but do they know how to upload it into Total Jobs and then set the preferences, as you say? So it has to be one-to-one in that regard. It has to be bespoke. But I think in the way now, and this idea has only just come to me, is to have a sort of virtual job club where you have, you know, the people with the tools that you've just supplied them with meet online at a particular time and place. And you kind of do a Q&A, or you do a workshop, and maybe you do a workshop on Google Mail and how to create folders, or how to mark as read, or whatever it is. There's this one thing that you're going to do that, as Ruth just pointed out, alleviates a ton of stress. And I'll tell you about what the stress that emails can do is the same thing that now we've moved from emails to WhatsApp. And so we've got WhatsApp, and we've got that message that you want to reply to. You see, mark it as unread, and then another one comes in, and then you're scrolling, and then it's like, okay, so now I've got WhatsApp, and now I've got this, and now I've got SIM. Then I may get a call from an employer, but it comes up unknown, and I don't take unknown calls. So what am I going to do? You know, there's all these levels to, and there's solutions for every single one of them. You know, unknown calls, set yourself a voicemail so you can record it. Make sure you budget yourself so you can retrieve that voicemail and listen to it, etc. Give yourself 48 hours to respond, because it may be for an interview. You know, and then you create step-by-step solutions like that. But trust me, you're not alone in this. You know, like I said, you know, we work with over 300 organizations, and there are many of them that have not even begun any element of digital transformation, and COVID has just left them. We serve our client base, you know, people that are working with homeless people, you know, and they provide food packages and things like this. Like, how do we reach them now, or how do we support them where they had one of the aforementioned job clubs and they can do that? So they still need to get work, and they still need to pay their rent, but now they can't come into the center. So I think, you know, these are some of the things that, if I may, we do. So please find my contact details. I'd love to be able to help you find a solution to this direct problem, because as we're talking about research, but this is the hierarchy of basic needs. There are people out there right now that cannot get the resources they need to exist, you know. And whilst, you know, this creates a number of tensions and stresses. So not only for the people that we're working with, but for us as practitioners, yourself, me, my team. We exist to help people be socially included, but now we can't. So who's supporting us deal with the fact that we're in this dissonance of like, oh, well, there has to be a line. We need to have a cutoff point, and whether that line is at If you finish at 7 or finish at 5, you just have to close that computer and walk away and be with your family or go for the walk or walk your dog or pet your cat or do something else. And then the next day, let's go and go full speed. So I think there's that whole thing around this new digital space, because neurodiversity is everything. Your mental health is your first health, right? Because if you're not right in how you perceive the world, that's going to affect everything from your health right down. And stress is the biggest killer. So please, yeah, find my details. Let's talk. Let me help you get off the ground.
I think that's a really important point about this. Yeah, and that's part of the overconnectedness, isn't it, as well, of this. So I'm looking forward to the tips and tricks on how to manage WhatsApp stress, because that's the next one.
I'm going to give you it right now, actually. The WhatsApp thing, and I found it out the beginning of this year. It's called WhatsApp Zero. So every message you read, you archive it. And we think of archive of, oh, it's gone. Actually, it's just hidden. And so the only thing you have in your WhatsApp are your unread emails or your unread messages. Everything else, you just archive it and you just keep it as blank as possible. Now, you think, oh, I've got to get back to Becky about that thing. What you do is go to new message, find Becky, and all your messages are still there. So your whole conversation hasn't gone, it hasn't deleted, everything's still there. So just archive everything that you've read, and that's it. And if it's important to you, you'll get back to it. You know, we create stresses by going, I've got to get back. I'm just going to leave it in my top. I even had my top people, like my daughter, my son, my family group. And I think these are the people that I interact with. But actually, just create an additional level of stress to think that I have to communicate with them when I actually don't have anything to say. Just archive it and WhatsApp Zero.
I think that's a great piece of closing advice. Actually, we're coming back to the how to escape the matrix and how to return us all to a sense of agency and control over our digital lives. So thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for coming today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.